We are back on the Hugh radio program. I am Kurt Schlichter, guest host here today. I'm a retired United States Army colonel, and one of the things I did, serving our country for almost 27 years, is a lot of disaster relief operations. I was in the Los Angeles riots. I was in the Los Angeles earthquake. I commanded 2 reinforced battalions in northern San Diego during the San Diego fire crisis. I planned disasters. I practiced disasters. I wrote about disasters in a law review and in professional journals. I did a lot of disaster stuff, and I watched Hurricane Ian and the response to it. And I got to tell you, folks, I was very, very impressed, which is why I'm so proud to bring aboard a naval veteran and the governor of the free state of Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt radio program.
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Governor DeSantis. And, of course, I played the Anchors Away as a tribute to your naval service. And, of course, the Navy is an important support arm to the decisive military force, the United States Army.
Well, we'll see in December how the game goes, so I'm looking forward to that one.
Well, look, I was Officer Cat at school. I really don't care what happens with West Point. But, Governor DeSantis, I was watching your disaster relief operations, and I said to myself, this is a man who sat through many, many staff briefings, decision briefs, course of action briefs. How did your military service, training, and experience help you with this response to Hurricane Ian?
Well, I think a couple things. I mean, number one, what happens when we go into a state of emergency for a hurricane, I designate the division, the director of the Division of Emergency Management as kind of the chief coordinating officer. So he's reporting directly to me. And then what we do is all other state agencies effectively report directly to him. So we have a clear chain of command. It used to be that you'd have someone kind of doing disaster and then like the governor's having to talk separately to all these agencies. And that's just not how we do it in Florida. All of those people are all hands on deck. We have a very clear chain of command when we're in a state of emergency. And so you see things like your staging folks, our National Guard is staged, ready to go for search and rescue. We have urban search and rescue teams that were literally on the road at midnight on the Wednesday the storm hit, driving through tropical storm force winds to be able to get to places like Fort Myers Beach. We also have Florida Fish and Wildlife officers who, these are waterborne operators who will go, and when you have barrier islands that are in distress, they're there. So they're all there ready to go, and then when the storm passes, immediately go into search and rescue operations. And I'm not necessarily in control of utility companies, but because we're marshaling every resource in the state, we had 42,000 linemen that were in the state of Florida, many of them from places like Texas and Alabama, staged and ready to go, which was also a difficult thing because if you remember the track of this storm, at one point there were models taking it to the Florida Panhandle. It ended up going in southwest Florida, cutting across the state. So we have a big, long peninsula. You got to be very nimble. But what that let us do is as soon as the storm passed, you had these power crews going in. So you had almost 3 million power restorations in really a matter of days, which was unprecedented. And so a lot of it's preparation, making sure you have the resources ready to go pre-staged that can be brought to bear for the rescue and response, but then just having a clear chain of command. That makes it run so much more efficiently.
Well, Governor DeSantis, if you're planning a battle, if you're a general, and you're kind of the equivalent of a 4-star, really, you know where the battle's going to be, and you kind of know when it's going to be. But you were presented with a problem set that was completely different. You had a massive storm. You didn't know its intensity. You didn't know where it was going to land. You had a huge swath of land that you had to cover. And not only were you working with military capabilities, but you had to bring in a whole interagency and approach. You had to deal with the federal government, you had to deal with non-governmental organizations, and you had to deal with businesses. So your job was exponentially harder in some ways than, say, a corps commander in contact. How did you approach that? Did you use a formal military decision-making process, or did you do it in some other way?
Well, one of the things that we did that I don't think they used to do in the past, we actually had the two-star admiral for the Coast Guard for a region in Tallahassee in our emergency operations center, and that allowed us to help coordinate the rescue operations. So you had National Guard, we had Chinook helicopters going into these barrier islands, we had boats going in with our fish and wildlife, but you had a lot of Coast Guard assets that were being brought to bear, some of the urban search and rescue teams being brought to bear. So we basically looked, okay, I control certain assets, and then there's other assets that are basically want to be there to help, and we need to be working together with them as well. And then you're right, you have all this stuff in the private sector, which if you're talking about a storm of this magnitude, there's of course a lot of damage. Storms of this magnitude produce, sadly, fatalities, and they produce people that lose everything. But if you look at the path of the storm, I mean, it probably affected 10 million people in terms of it going over. Fortunately, the vast majority of those people did not lose their home and did not lose life or limb. And so the issue is, the more we can get those people back to normal with the power, water, and the normal clearing the roads, then all the other things we're doing for search and rescue, for helping people that have been displaced, those become so much more achievable. If you go in a situation where it's like 3 or 4 weeks where someone who had barely tropical storm force winds is in a community where they don't have power, then it just becomes, people start to get very antsy about that, and it makes everything more difficult. So we viewed restoring those basic services for the people who may not have been affected as much as someone, let's say, on Fort Myers Beach, as really essential to our efforts to bring as much power and resources to bear on the folks who directly suffered the most.
Well, Governor DeSantis, that brings me to an important point, which is when a commander, and you were the commander, approaches an operation, he has specific objectives. He has an intent. And what I'm reading from you is your intent was, we need to immediately restore power. We need to immediately conduct search and rescue operations. We need to immediately rebuild vital logistics lines, that is bridges and roads and things. Did you formally set out your intent? How did you tell your people, gentlemen, ladies, this is what I want, and I want it now?
Yeah, well, this is something that we prepare for, and so we go through exercises every year. We have done, the media was talking about this being a storm hitting Tampa Bay, which is a very vulnerable part of our state to things like storm surge. So we've done Category 5 exercises about a hurricane going into, say, Tampa Bay, which people say would be the worst case. So these are things that we have ball gamed in the past, and my Director of Emergency Management knows very clearly, that our priorities are, of course, the protection of life and the rescue operations. Now, leading into a hurricane, we declare a state of emergency. It allows us to marshal resources. It also allows the local counties to marshal resources, and they all have emergency management departments. They've got a lot of people who are very experienced in these things and do a very good job. A lot of the pre-storm stuff, we're in more of a support role. If they need resources, we can surge it to them, but they're the ones that are, say, orchestrating shelters if they call for an evacuation. So a lot of that is kind of bottom up as the storm's coming, and then once that storm hits, it's really us leading the response. And yes, protection of life first and foremost, but then getting these vital arteries of transportation back and making sure that we can restore power, very, very important. There's going to be people who are still displaced. We have places that they can go and all this, but to get the power and to get the bridge, we had 2 bridges knocked out in Southwest Florida. There was one bridge going to Pine Island, and they were actually being told by some of the folks locally, hey, you guys got to get off the island. This is going to take 6 months to be able to get a solution here. So they came to me. This is a couple days after the storm. They said, can you help us? And I'm like, yeah, I'll help. What can we do? So we looked into, do you do like a barge for them? And I'm like, well, what about if we just try to repair this thing? And so we sent engineers down, and they're like, yeah, we think we can do a temporary bridge here. So we said we were going to do it. 3 days later, we were able to open it to the public, and they were able to get back and forth to the mainland. And that basically saved the island, because if they weren't able to get back and forth, basically would have just withered. We also have a causeway going to Sanibel Island, which was severed in 3 different places. And so we did the Pine Island, and we said we've got to do Sanibel. It's a little bit tougher task, but we're going to do it. Last Tuesday, we were able to bring hundreds of power trucks across this refurbished Sanibel Causeway after less than 2 weeks of it being severed. And this week we are going to open it, be able to open it for all civilian traffic to be able to get back and forth through the island. So those are things where if you let islands like that toil and they don't have the ability to get the resources they need, they can basically wither. And so I thought it was very important that we be able to restore a sense of at least somewhat normalcy for them. And Pine Island's really coming back strong. Sanibel had really bad damage, so there's going to be a lot of TLC that's needed there. But if we had just left that for 6 months with people only being able to get back and forth through boats, I guarantee you the recovery on that would have been probably an insurmountable mountain. Now we've had power people working, we've had people working on the infrastructure now for weeks, and we were helicoptering in people before we did the causeway. So now you have the prospect of bringing this place back to life, and it's very important. But you got to act quickly, because if you let it toil, I think the odds of it coming back strongly, I think, go down dramatically.
Well, Governor DeSantis, one of the things that people are yearning for is basic competence out of our government, the ability to actually perform, especially under pressure when it's an emergency. And I think the fact that the mainstream media is not talking about Hurricane Ian anymore demonstrates that you and your team, because this is a team effort, as you've recognized, have performed very, very well. One of the things a commander sometimes has to do is be unreasonable. That is to tell people, I need X done, even though maybe your people don't think it can be done. Is that kind of how you got these infrastructure repairs done? I want this island connected. I want you to get it fixed. Figure it out. I want it done. Get it done. Is that how you approached it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, basically, we say that, red tape is just unacceptable in situations like this. And if you think about the bridges that we've done already, there's states in this country where they wouldn't have even had a plan to fix it for 6 months. I mean, that's just the reality. And so we were not going to do that. We used to in this country be able to do big things very quickly. We've lost that in many respects. And so we just said, I don't want to hear any excuses. Don't worry about the bureaucracy. Don't worry about the red tape. We still, when you do these projects, I mean, they still did like an emergency bid so companies could bid their services, but they did it very quickly, and they said time is of the essence, and that was a very important component of this. So, yeah, you cannot be ground down in bureaucracy and red tape, but that's part of the reason why you have the streamlined chain of command where it's the governor, the emergency management director, and then every other state agency basically at the disposal of the emergency response.
Governor DeSantis, you mentioned the line of lineman trucks, and I remember that visual, and it struck me as very, very powerful. Again, Americans are yearning for competence, and seeing that line sent a message of competence. I watched what you did. You were out there at like the Waffle House cooking. Yep. You were doing press conferences. How important is it for a governor in a disaster to get out there and show people that normalcy is coming back, that things are under control, that things are getting done?
Well, I just think if you end up where the population just kind of gets mired in a sense of hopelessness, like has happened in other storms in our country, in my lifetime, that just makes everything so much more difficult. Now, the folks that got hit the worst in Southwest Florida, I mean, these are good, solid, very resilient people. So we were fortunate in the sense that these people bounce back by their nature. But to be down there and say, hey, things are going to come back. We want us to have a rapid recovery. In fact, I was at the Waffle House, but I remember even the next day after the storm, you had things like Wawa open down there. Now, contrast that. They can be open in Florida less than 24 hours after almost a Category 5 storm hits, yet in Philadelphia, they can't open because of all the crime, in the streets and stuff. And so it's really a sharp contrast between more of a can-do spirit, not just on the part of the government, but on the part of folks in the private sector. And so that made a huge difference when you could go to the supermarket. Publix was open. It's our biggest supermarket chain. They were open Friday morning for a storm that left Wednesday evening in places like Cape Coral, which was pretty close to ground zero. So I think that made a big, big difference, and I think it's helped people be able to do what they need to do to get their own families back on their feet. I mean, you have people, maybe they had roof damage, maybe they had some flood damage, but they can save their home, but it's still an uncomfortable thing. And so having all those other services and everything kind of pop back quicker than I think anybody would have predicted, I think it just makes everything better in terms of the overall morale of the effort.
Now, Governor DeSantis, in any military operation, you have what we call friction. That is little things that take away from your focus, take away from your ability to plan and execute. One of the things that you had was unique. You had politics in the sense that you were also running for election at this time. You were dealing with some localities that may have had people who are political opponents. You're also dealing with federal government, which is held by a different political party. How did you navigate that challenge in executing the Hurricane Ian operation?
Well, with respect to the White House, the media on, I think it was the Monday before the storm hit on a Wednesday, it was like Monday afternoon, and they said, Biden is calling these Democrat mayors in Tampa Bay, but he refuses to talk to the governor. So I was asked about a press conference, and I said, guys, nobody has done more to stand up against Biden's policies than us here in Florida, and we're proud of that. But at the same time, I've got people's lives and property and livelihoods in jeopardy, and I'm not going to play politics with that. So my phone line is open. We want all the support we can get from all the various levels of government, and we need to move forward in one team. And there's a time to do all the political stuff, but then there's a time to say, let's work together. And honestly, to their credit, we worked very well with FEMA, worked incredibly well with the Coast Guard. So I think we were able to minimize some of that friction. And I think at the end of the day, of course, how the national media in particular deals with this. I remember when I got elected governor, before I took office, one of the other governors, experienced governor, told me, anytime you have any of these big events in your state, if it's just kind of the press, it'll be relatively normal. The minute the nationals come in, it's all about driving their agenda, and all they care about is whatever hook they can use to advance the narratives that they're seeking to do. And so we knew, when you get some of these national outlets, and they were trying to find a negative narrative, they wanted to be able to advance an agenda. And my view on that is look, just work hard, do the job, get things done, and let the chips fall where they may.
Well, you certainly did, Governor DeSantis. I think you did an outstanding job. I was inspired, and I spent a lot of time doing that job. So I think I got a pretty good perspective of it. Thank you very much, Governor DeSantis, for those leadership hints and that discussion. This is the Hugh Hewitt radio program.